Sarah Mitchell stood outside Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, her hand gripping the worn leather strap of her nursing bag. The early morning sun painted the building's facade in shades of gold and amber, but she barely noticed. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from fear, but from something deeper. Anticipation mixed with old memories she tried hard to bury. She'd been here before, years ago, but on the other side. As a patient. As a soldier with shrapnel embedded in her shoulder and a purple heart she never wanted. Taking a deep breath, Sarah pushed through the glass doors. The familiar smell of antiseptic and floor polish hit her immediately. Somewhere down a corridor, a monitor beeped steadily. A physician's voice called out orders. It was a symphony she knew by heart, though the audience had changed. She was no longer the wounded warrior being wheeled through these halls. Now, she was here to heal others. "You must be the new nurse," a voice said flatly. Sarah turned to find a tall man in surgical scrubs, his salt and pepper hair perfectly combed, his white coat immaculate. The name embroidered on his chest read, Dr. Marcus Brennan, Chief of Surgery. His eyes swept over her with the kind of assessment that measured and found wanting in the same glance. "Sarah Mitchell, sir. Reporting for my first shift," she said, extending her hand. Dr. Brennan looked at her outstretched hand as if she'd offered him a dead fish. After an awkward pause, he gave it the briefest of shakes before dropping it. "Mitchell," he repeated, consulting his tablet. "Yes, trauma wing you come from, civilian general practice." His eyebrow arched skeptically. "Community hospital, yes, sir," Sarah replied, keeping her voice neutral. She didn't mention the hospital served a veterans community, didn't mention why she'd chosen that particular posting. Dr. Brennan's expression suggested he'd already written her off. "Well, this isn't your typical nursing home or suburban ER, Mitchell. This is a military medical facility. Our patients are warriors, Marines, Army Rangers, Navy SEALs. They require a certain fortitude." His tone made it clear he doubted she possessed any such quality. Behind him, two younger doctors had gathered, clipboards in hand. One, a resident named Dr. Phillips, smirked openly. "Think she can handle a sucking chest wound, Chief," he whispered, just loud enough for Sarah to hear. "Doubtful," Dr. Brennan replied, not bothering to lower his voice. "But we're short-staffed, so we make do." He turned back to Sarah. "You look a little delicate for this unit. Our patients don't need someone who'll faint at the sight of blood." Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she'd had during her first week of basic training when her drill sergeant said women didn't belong in combat units. The same feeling when male soldiers questioned whether she could carry her weight on patrol. She'd proven them wrong then. She'd proved Dr. Brennan wrong now. "I'll manage, sir," she said quietly, meeting his gaze without flinching. Dr. Brennan snorted. "We'll see. Phillips, show her around. Try not to let her get in the way during rounds." He strode off, his expensive shoes clicking authoritatively on the linoleum. Dr. Phillips gestured lazily for Sarah to follow. "Come on, delicate flower," he said with a condescending grin. "Let me show you where we keep the Band-Aids." The other doctors chuckled as Sarah followed him down the corridor, her jaw tight but her expression calm. She'd learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words. Let them laugh now. They'd see soon enough. The tour was perfunctory and dismissive. Dr. Phillips rattled off room numbers and protocols while texting on his phone, barely looking at her. "Supply closet, medication room, break room. Don't use the good coffee maker, that's for doctors only," he said with a smug smile. "ICU is through those doors. That's where the real cases are. Probably too intense for you." Sarah nodded, memorizing everything despite his attitude. Years of military discipline had taught her to absorb information even in hostile environments. As they approached the ICU, the energy shifted. The beeping of monitors intensified. Nurses moved with urgent efficiency. Through the glass partition, Sarah could see multiple occupied beds, each holding a story of sacrifice and survival. Fresh arrival this morning, Dr. Phillips said, gesturing vaguely toward a bed in the corner. Navy SEAL. Some classified op went sideways, took shrapnel to the chest and abdomen. He's sedated now, but he'll need round-the-clock monitoring. Since you're new, you'll probably get assigned to him. He said it like it was punishment duty. Sarah moved closer to the window. Even from a distance, she could see the extent of the patient's injuries. Multiple IV lines snaked into his arms. Bandages wrapped his torso, already showing spots of seepage. A ventilator helped him breathe. His chart, visible on the computer screen, read, Commander James Hawk Harrison, age 37, SEAL Team Deployment. Something in Sarah's chest constricted. Another warrior broken by war. Another life hanging in the balance. This was why she'd come back. This was why she'd left the quiet safety of civilian medicine to return to military hospitals, despite the memories they triggered. He's critical, she observed, her trained eye catching details. The slight irregularity in his heart rhythm, the concerning level of fluid output, the position of his breathing tube. Dr. Phillips shrugged. Yeah, well, he's a SEAL. They're tough. He'll probably be fine. His casual dismissal of the man's condition irritated Sarah, but she said nothing. Mitchell, Dr. Brennan's voice boomed across the ICU. Stop sightseeing and get to work. I want vitals checked on beds 3, 7, and 9. Think you can handle that without supervision? Yes, sir, Sarah replied crisply. As the doctors walked away, she heard Dr. Brennan mutter to Phillips, Give her a week. She'll either quit or wash out. They always do. Sarah set down her bag, tied her dark hair back into a tight bun, and rolled up her sleeves. The faint scars on her forearms, souvenirs from Kandahar, caught the fluorescent light for just a moment before she pulled on her gloves. Let them underestimate her. She'd been underestimated before. She had work to do. 3 days into her assignment, Sarah had settled into the brutal rhythm of the trauma wing. 12-hour shifts that often stretched to 14. Coffee that tasted like motor oil. The constant symphony of monitors, ventilators, and urgent voices calling out medical codes. She moved through it all with quiet efficiency, earning grudging nods from fellow nurses but continued disdain from the surgical staff. Dr. Brennan seemed to take particular pleasure in undermining her at every opportunity. On Wednesday morning, during rounds, Sarah stood at the back of the physician cluster as they discussed a 19-year-old Marine named Rodriguez. He'd been injured in a training exercise, a bad fall resulting in a compound fracture of the left femur. The bone had pierced through the skin, and infection was a serious concern. We'll take him to surgery this afternoon, Dr. Brennan announced, scrolling through the digital chart on his tablet. Standard procedure, reduction, internal fixation, antibiotics. Questions. Sarah hesitated, then raised her hand slightly. Several doctors turned to look at her with expressions ranging from surprise to annoyance. Yes, Nurse Mitchell. Dr. Brennan's tone dripped with exaggerated patience, like a teacher forced to acknowledge a slow student. I was reviewing Rodriguez's file last night, Sarah began carefully. His leg positioning in the current splint may be compromising blood flow to the extremity. The dorsalis pedis pulse is weak, and there's some concerning pallor in the foot. I'd recommend we adjust the angle before surgery and possibly consider. You'd recommend, Dr. Brennan interrupted, his eyebrows shooting up theatrically. The other doctors shifted, a few smirking. I'm sorry, I must have missed your medical degree, Nurse Mitchell. Where did you attend? Johns Hopkins, Harvard. Laughter rippled through the group. Dr. Phillips barely suppressed a snort. I don't have a medical degree, sir, Sarah replied evenly, though her cheeks flushed. But I have observed that the current positioning is exactly where I placed it. Dr. Brennan cut her off again, his voice hardening. Perhaps in your community hospital nurses play doctor. Here we have a hierarchy. Doctors diagnose and prescribe treatment. Nurses follow orders. Is that clear enough for you? Crystal clear, sir, Sarah said quietly, dropping her gaze. Good, Dr. Brennan turned back to his entourage. As I was saying, standard protocol. The nurse will prep him for surgery at 1400 hours. He emphasized the word nurse with barely concealed contempt. As the group moved on, Dr. Phillips lingered for a moment, leaning close enough that Sarah could smell his expensive cologne. "Friendly advice, sweetheart," he whispered mockingly. "Don't try to think above your station. Makes you look desperate. And besides, you're way too pretty to be taken seriously as anything but, well, a nurse." Sarah's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she maintained her composure. "Noted, doctor," she said through gritted teeth. After rounds, she returned to her station and quietly documented her observations in Rodriguez's chart anyway. She noted the pulse readings, the skin color changes, the slight coolness of the extremity. If something went wrong, at least there would be a record that someone had noticed. Still trying to play hero, Sarah looked up to find Nurse Jennifer Chen, a veteran ICU nurse with 15 years at Walter Reed, watching her with sympathetic eyes. "Just doing my job," Sarah replied. "Brennan's a brilliant surgeon, but he's got an ego the size of Texas," Jennifer said, lowering her voice. "He doesn't like being questioned, especially not by women, especially not by nurses. You're hitting his biggest trigger points." "I wasn't trying to question him. I was trying to help the patient." "I know, and you're probably right about Rodriguez's leg. But in this unit, being right doesn't matter if you don't have MD after your name." Jennifer squeezed her shoulder sympathetically before moving on to check on another patient. Sarah sighed and turned her attention to updating medication logs. The morning dragged on with its endless tasks: vitals checks, medication administration, wound dressings, patient comfort measures. She was adjusting an IV line on a recovering Army Ranger when her pager buzzed. "ICU Bed 7, Commander Harrison. Immediate attention required." Sarah grabbed her supplies and hurried to the ICU. Commander James Harrison had been slowly improving over the past 3 days, his vital signs stabilizing, his sedation gradually reduced. But as she approached his bed, she could see he was in distress. His face was contorted with pain, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool room temperature. The monitors showed his heart rate climbing, 110, 115, 120 beats per minute. "Commander Harrison, can you hear me?" Sarah asked, checking his pupils with a penlight. They were reactive but showed obvious pain response. Hawk's eyes fluttered open, hazy with medication but conscious. He tried to speak, but could only manage a strangled groan around the breathing tube. "I know it hurts," Sarah said, her voice calm and professional. "I'm going to check your dressings and adjust your pain medication. Try to breathe slowly. In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it." As she carefully peeled back the bandages on his chest, she noted the wound appearance. No signs of infection, but the tissue was severely traumatized. Shrapnel had torn through muscle and scraped bone. She'd seen wounds like this before, many times, in the field, under fire, when there was no time to be gentle and every second counted. Her hands moved with practiced precision, cleaning the wound edges, applying fresh dressings, adjusting the medication drip. Despite his pain, Commander Harrison watched her through half-lidded eyes. There was something in her movements, not just competence but a specific kind of efficiency. Military efficiency. "Afghanistan," he managed to rasp, his voice barely audible. Sarah's hands paused for just a fraction of a second. "What?" "You been there," Hawk whispered, his eyes more focused now despite the pain. "Field medicine, combat, I can tell." Sarah's jaw tightened. She resumed her work without answering, securing the final bandage with more force than necessary. "You need to rest, Commander. Stop trying to talk." But Hawk's gaze remained fixed on her, tracking her movements. He noticed everything: the way she anticipated his pain responses before he showed them, how she positioned his body to minimize stress on his injuries, the faint scars visible on her forearms when her sleeves rode up. Those weren't typical civilian scars. They were shrapnel scars, fragment wounds. The The kind you got when explosions happen too close. What unit? He pressed, though each word clearly cost him effort. Commander Harrison, you need to conserve your energy, Sarah said firmly, adjusting his pillow. What unit? He repeated, more insistent. Before Sarah could deflect again, alarms suddenly erupted throughout the hospital. Not just one or two, but a cascade of urgent beeping from the emergency broadcast system. Mass casualty event. All available staff to ER. Mass casualty event. This is not a drill. The announcement echoed through every corridor, every room. Sarah's head snapped up, her entire body going rigid. For a split second, something changed in her eyes, a sharpness, a readiness that hadn't been there before. She quickly secured Commander Harrison's lines and checked his monitors. Your vitals are stable. I have to go. Wait, Hawk called out weakly, but Sarah was already moving. As she burst through the ICU doors and sprinted toward the emergency room, her gait changed. No longer the quiet, deferential nurse being mocked by surgeons. Her shoulders squared, her stride purposeful and controlled. She moved like someone running toward gunfire, not away from it. Behind her, Commander Harrison stared at the empty doorway, his pain momentarily forgotten. He'd served with enough combat medics to recognize one when he saw one. That woman had seen war, real war. He was sure of it. And if the doctors in this hospital couldn't see that, they were fools. Down in the emergency room, chaos was about to erupt, and Sarah Mitchell was about to show Walter Reed exactly what she was made of. Whether they were ready for it or not, the emergency room had been a war zone. 23 soldiers injured in a convoy training accident, multiple vehicle collision with fire involvement. Burns, crush injuries, fractures, internal bleeding. The kind of chaos that separated competent medical staff from exceptional ones. Sarah had been exceptional. Now, 6 hours later, she returned to the ICU exhausted but composed. Her scrubs bore evidence of the battle, blood stains, streaks of antiseptic, a small tear near the shoulder. Her hair had come loose from its bun, dark strands framing her face, but her hands were steady as she checked her patient's charts. Commander James "Hawk" Harrison had watched the clock the entire time she'd been gone. Pain medication kept the worst of his injuries at bay, but his mind remained sharp. Sharp enough to notice that when Sarah had sprinted toward that emergency, she hadn't run like someone afraid. She'd run like someone trained to run toward danger. When she finally appeared at his bedside, Hawk was ready. "You're back," he said, his voice stronger now. The breathing tube had been removed that morning, leaving his throat raw but functional. "I am," Sarah replied, checking his monitors with quick efficiency. "Heart rate looks good, blood pressure stable. How's your pain level, Commander?" "Manageable, stop deflecting." Sarah's hands paused on the IV line. "Excuse me." "You heard me, Captain." The title hung in the air between them like a live grenade. Sarah's face remained carefully neutral, but Hawk saw the micro-expression, the slight widening of her eyes, the momentary tension in her jaw. "I'm not a captain, Commander. I'm a nurse. Now if you'll let me check." "Your posture gave you away first," Hawk interrupted, his eyes never leaving her face. "The way you stand, weight evenly distributed, always aware of exits. Then the scars on your arms, fragmentation wounds, unless I miss my guess. Combat medics don't get those from nursing school." Sarah set down her clipboard with deliberate care. "Commander Harrison, you need to focus on recovery, not Afghanistan," Hawk continued, undeterred. "You confirmed it yesterday when I asked. Most people would have said no comment or made something up. You said Afghanistan like you were admitting something you wished you could forget." He shifted in his bed, wincing but determined. "How many tour?" For a long moment, Sarah said nothing. She busied herself adjusting his pillows, checking wound dressings, anything to avoid his penetrating gaze. But Hawk was a SEAL commander. He'd interrogated enemy combatants and interviewed potential team members. He knew how to read people. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. 4. Hawk's eyebrows rose. Fortour was significant. Fortour meant someone who kept going back, kept volunteering for the worst assignments. Special operations. Sarah's silence was answer enough. What happened? Hawk asked, his tone shifting from interrogation to genuine concern. Nothing that concerns you, Commander. Sarah's professional mask was firmly back in place. Now, I really need to change your chest dressing. This will hurt. As she carefully peeled back the bandages, Hawk studied her face. Up close, he could see details he'd missed before. The faint scar along her right temple, the way her hands trembled almost imperceptibly when they touched certain types of wounds, the haunted quality in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. Kandahar, he guessed quietly. Sarah's hand stopped moving. For several heartbeats, she stood frozen, antiseptic-soaked gauze suspended in midair. When she finally looked at him, Hawk saw something crack in her carefully maintained composure. How did you? She started, then caught herself. Lucky guess. Some of my team operated in that region. 2021, right? There was an incident, ambush on a Special Forces patrol with embedded medical support. I remember because the after-action reports were intense. Hawk watched her face carefully. 12 soldiers went out. Only 6 came back. But all 6 survived because one combat medic. Stop, Sarah said sharply. Her hands had started shaking now enough to be visible. She set down her instruments and stepped back from his bed. Just stop. You saved them, Hawk said softly. You were wounded yourself, but you held that position for hours, treated injuries under fire, called in medevac coordinates while bleeding from shrapnel wounds. They gave you the Silver Star. They gave me nightmares, Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. They gave me 6 dead faces I see every time I close my eyes. They gave me a medal for failing to save half my team. The raw pain in her words struck Hawk silent. He'd seen combat stress, PTSD, survivor's guilt. Hell, he'd experienced it himself. But there was something particularly devastating about watching this composed, competent woman crack under the weight of memories she'd been carrying alone. You didn't fail, he said firmly. You saved 6 lives against impossible odds. I lost 6 others. Sarah turned away, wiping her eyes quickly. The Taliban had us pinned down. We couldn't move, couldn't retreat. I had soldiers bleeding out in my hands and I couldn't. Her voice broke completely. For a moment, the only sound was the steady beeping of Hawk's monitors and the distant bustle of the ICU. Why'd you come back? Hawk asked finally. To military medicine, I mean. After something like that, most people would run as far from this world as possible. Sarah took a deep breath, composing herself. When she turned back to face him, her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. Because these soldiers, your teammates, the Marines in this ICU, the Rangers recovering from surgery, they deserve someone who understands, someone who's been there, someone who won't give up on them when things get hard. Someone like you. Someone who knows the cost, Sarah corrected, and who's willing to pay it again if necessary. Hawk nodded slowly, a new respect evident in his expression. The doctors here have no idea who you are, do they? A bitter smile crossed Sarah's face. They see a delicate nurse from a civilian hospital. They don't know. They don't need to know. But they should, Hawk argued. The way Brennan talks to you, the way Phillips. It doesn't matter, Sarah interrupted. Their opinions don't change my job. I'm here to care for patients, not to earn respect from surgeons with God complexes. It matters, Hawk said quietly. Respect matters, recognition matters. You earned both even if you don't want them. Before Sarah could respond, footsteps approached. Dr. Brennan appeared, flanked by 2 residents. His expression soured when he saw Sarah still at Hawk's bedside. Nurse Mitchell, are you finished? Some of us have actual work to do, he said dismissively. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she simply nodded. Yes, doctor, Commander Harrison's dressings have been changed and vitals are stable. Wonderful. Now perhaps you could make yourself useful in the supply room. We're low on gauze. As Sarah moved to leave, Hawk called out, Dr. Brennan. Yes, Commander. That nurse you just dismissed. She's the best medical professional in this hospital. You do well to remember that. Dr. Brennan's laugh was condescending. With all due respect, Commander, SEALs are experts in many things. Evaluating nursing competency isn't one of them. Rest now. You're still recovering. As they walked away, Hawk heard Phillips mutter, Guy's probably just crushing on the pretty nurse. Happens all the time with patients. Alone again, Hawk stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. Sarah Mitchell was more than these doctors realized. Far more. And he was going to make damn sure they found out. But first, he needed to make some phone calls. His phone sat on the bedside table, just within reach. With considerable effort and no small amount of pain, Hawk stretched for it. Time to call in some favors. The call came at 2:47 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, the worst possible time. The ER was already operating at near capacity when the radio crackled to life with a transmission that made every medical professional's blood run cold. Walter Reed, this is Medevac 72. We have a mass casualty situation. Training convoy collision at Fort Belvoir, multiple vehicles involved, structure fire. 23 urgent casualties inbound. ETA 12 minutes. Repeat, 23 urgent casualties, multiple traumas. Dr. Brennan stood in the ER command center, his face draining of color as he processed the numbers. 23 patients. His staff could handle maybe 10 simultaneously with proper coordination. 23 would overwhelm every available resource. Get every available surgeon down here now, he barked into the intercom. Clear all non-essential personnel. Prep every trauma bay. Move. The ER exploded into barely controlled chaos. Nurses sprinted to prep treatment areas. Residents scrambled to gown up. Equipment carts crashed into each other as people rushed in different directions. In the confusion, no one noticed the quiet nurse from the ICU slip into the room. Sarah Mitchell took one look at the pandemonium and immediately assessed the situation with the cold calculation of someone who'd done this before under much worse conditions. No incoming fire here. No dust choking the air. No screams of wounded soldiers waiting for medevac. This was manageable. If someone took control. Dr. Brennan stood paralyzed in the center of the storm, his tablet clutched uselessly in his hand. His usual surgical confidence had evaporated in the face of overwhelming numbers. He started to call out instructions, then stopped, overwhelmed by the sheer logistics. Someone needs to, we should, he stammered, his authority crumbling. Phillips, where's Phillips? Here, Chief. Dr. Phillips appeared, looking equally panicked. What do you need? We need to, the trauma bays need. Brennan's voice trailed off, his mind unable to process the cascading demands fast enough. The first ambulance screeched to a halt outside, then another, and another. Time was running out. Sarah moved. Listen up, her voice cut through the chaos like a rifle shot, sharp and commanding. Every head in the ER turned toward her. This wasn't the quiet, deferential nurse they'd been mocking. This was something else entirely. We have 12 minutes before patients arrive. Here's how this works. Trauma bays 1 through 4, severe burns. 5 through 8, orthopedic injuries. 9 through 12, internal trauma and GSW protocols. Triage station at the ambulance bay entrance. Move now. For a split second, nobody moved, shocked by the transformation. Then Nurse Jennifer Chen nodded sharply and began directing her team. Others followed. Dr. Brennan found his voice. Now wait just a minute, Nurse Mitchell. I'm in charge of this ER. Then start acting like it, Doctor, Sarah snapped, her gray eyes hard as steel. You have 22 minutes of medical school and surgical training over me, but I have 4 combat tour and more mass casualty experience than everyone in this room combined. Right now, these soldiers need a combat medic, not a surgeon with an ego. So either help or get out of my way." The ER went silent. No one had ever spoken to Dr. Brennan like that, ever. Brennan's face turned crimson, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. But before he could respond, the first wave of ambulances arrived. "Incoming," someone shouted. Paramedics burst through the doors pushing gurneys, their faces grim. 20-year-old male, degree burns over 40% of body, BP dropping, possible smoke inhalation. "Trauma 1, Sarah called out without hesitation. "Get him on high-flow oxygen, 2 large-bore IVs, lactated ringers. Move." She pointed to a resident frozen near the door. What's your name?" "Dr. Morrison, ma'am." "Morrison, you're with me. Bring the burn cart." Sarah was already moving toward the patient, her hands flying over his body, assessing injuries with frightening speed. Second and degree burns, face, chest, arms. Airway is compromised. We need to intubate now before the swelling closes his throat completely. Dr. Morrison fumbled with the intubation kit, his hands shaking. "Look at me," Sarah said, her voice suddenly calm and steady. "You've done this 100 times in training. This is no different. Deep breath. You've got this." Morrison nodded, his hands steadying. Under Sarah's guidance, he successfully placed the breathing tube while she simultaneously established IV access and began fluid resuscitation. "Good," Sarah said. "Now get him to the burn unit next." Another gurney crashed through the doors. Female, 22, compound femur fracture, possible internal bleeding. "Trauma 5, Sarah directed. "Get me an orthopedic surgeon and a CBC stat. Check for compartment syndrome." She turned to find Dr. Phillips standing uselessly nearby. "Phillips, stop starring and get me an ultrasound. She might have a splenic rupture." More patients flooded in. A private with a collapsed lung, a sergeant with a crushed pelvis, 2 soldiers with severe concussions, a young Marine with burns so severe that even the paramedics looked shaken. Sarah was everywhere at once, moving between patients with fluid precision. She called out orders, directed traffic, made split-second triage decisions that would mean the difference between life and death. Her voice never wavered, never hesitated. "Trauma 3, pneumothorax, get me a chest tube kit. Trauma 7, that leg fracture is cutting off circulation. We need to reduce it before necrosis sets in. Trauma 9, pupils are unequal, possible intracranial bleed. Get me a CT scan now." Dr. Brennan watched in stunned silence as his ER transformed from chaos into a well-orchestrated machine. This woman, this nurse he dismissed as delicate, was running a mass casualty operation with the efficiency of a seasoned field commander. A young resident approached a patient with a sucking chest wound, clearly out of his depth. Sarah was at his side instantly. "What do you see?" she asked. "A chest trauma, difficulty breathing." "It's a tension pneumothorax," Sarah said quickly. "Air is getting into his chest cavity but can't get out. His lung is collapsing. If we don't act in the next 60 seconds, his heart will stop. Do you know how to do a needle decompression?" The resident's face went pale. I've never done one on a real patient." "You're about to. Get me a 14-gauge needle." Sarah's hands were already positioning the patient, feeling for landmarks. "Second intercostal space, midclavicular line. Feel it." "I think so." "You need to be sure. Here." She guided his fingers. "That's the right spot. Now when you insert, aim just over the rib to avoid the neurovascular bundle underneath. Ready." The resident nodded, his jaw set with determination. Under Sarah's steady guidance, he performed the procedure. There was a hiss of escaping air, and the patient's breathing immediately improved. "Excellent work, doctor," Sarah said. "Now get him to CT for a full chest scan." Patient after patient, Sarah worked with relentless efficiency. She sutured lacerations, set fractures, stabilized spines, managed airways. When a soldier started seizing from a head injury, she had him medicated and intubated before most people even realized what was happening. When another patient went into cardiac arrest, she coordinated the code with such precision that they achieved return of spontaneous circulation in under 3 minutes. 2 hours later, the last patient was stabilized and moved to either surgery, ICU, or a recovery ward. Not a single death. 23 patients, multiple life-threatening injuries, and every single one survived the initial trauma because of flawless triage and treatment. The ER staff stood exhausted, covered in blood and sweat, but alive with the adrenaline of having just achieved something remarkable. Sarah stripped off her gloves and tossed them in the biohazard bin, her hands finally showing the tremor of post-adrenaline crash. She took a deep breath, pushing her loose hair back from her face. Dr. Brennan approached slowly, his expression unreadable. "Nurse Mitchell." Sarah turned, expecting another reprimand. "Yes, doctor." For a long moment he just stared at her. Then very quietly he said, "Where did you learn to do that?" "Kandahar province, doctor, under fire, with half the supplies and twice the casualties." Her voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "This was a good day." Brennan opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. We need to talk about your role here, about." "With respect, doctor, I need to check on my ICU patients," Sarah interrupted. "We can talk later." She walked away, leaving Dr. Brennan standing in the middle of his ER, suddenly aware that he'd been grossly mistaken about the delicate nurse from the civilian hospital. And he wasn't the only one who'd noticed. Commander James Harrison lay in his hospital bed, staring at his cell phone like it held the secrets of the universe. His chest ached from the movement, his side burned where shrapnel had carved through muscle, but none of that mattered right now. What mattered was the quiet nurse who just commanded an entire emergency room like a seasoned battlefield officer. The woman the doctors called delicate. Hawk had spent 15 years in naval special warfare. He'd operated in 17 countries, completed over 100 combat missions, and worked alongside the best warriors America had to offer. He knew what a trained operator looked like, how they moved, how they thought, how they functioned under pressure. Sarah Mitchell was an operator, and he was going to find out exactly who she was. His fingers hovered over the contact list. First call, Master Chief David "Smoke" Rodriguez, his former SEAL teammate who now worked at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado. If anyone could access cross-service personnel records, it was Smoke. The phone rang twice. "Hawk, brother, heard you got yourself ventilated. How's the hospital food?" Smoke's gravelly voice carried the easy confidence of a man who'd survived too many close calls to sweat the small stuff. "Tastes like cardboard soaked in regret," Hawk replied, managing a weak smile. "Listen, I need a favor, quiet one." Smoke's tone shifted immediately. "Talk to me." "I need information on an Army nurse. Name's Sarah Mitchell. Currently stationed here at Walter Reed, but she's prior service. Special operations, I think. Afghanistan deployment, probably around 2021. There was a pause. This official or personal curiosity? Let's call it professional interest. Something's not adding up, and I need to know who I'm dealing with. Give me 30 minutes. The line went dead. Hawk set down his phone and tried to sit up straighter, immediately regretting it as pain lanced through his torso. A nurse, not Sarah, appeared immediately. "Commander, you need to stay still. You're going to reopen your incisions." "I'm fine," Hawk lied through gritted teeth. "You're stubborn," the nurse corrected, adjusting his pillows. "Though I suppose that's what makes you SEALs so effective. That and a concerning disregard for your own well-being." She checked his vitals. "Your heart rate is elevated. Are you in pain?" "Nothing I can't handle." She gave him a knowing look. "That's what they all say, right up until they pass out." She made a note on her tablet. "I'll let Nurse Mitchell know when she comes back. She seems to have a way of getting you stubborn types to actually take care of yourselves." "Where is she?" Hawk asked, trying to sound casual. "Probably in the staff room trying to decompress. What she did down in that ER." The nurse shook her head in amazement. "I've been here 8 years, Commander. Never seen anything like it. It was like watching a general command troops. Dr. Brennan didn't know whether to be grateful or humiliated." "Both probably," Hawk muttered. 27 minutes later, his phone buzzed. Hawk grabbed it so fast he nearly knocked over his water cup. "A text from Smoke, call me. Secure line, you're not going to believe this." Hawk's pulse quickened as he dialed. Smoke answered on the first ring. "Hawk, what exactly did this woman do to earn your attention?" "She took over a mass casualty situation and saved 23 lives without breaking a sweat. Moved like she'd done it 1,000 times. Why?" "Because she probably has," Smoke said quietly. "Brother, you stumbled onto something. Sarah Mitchell isn't just prior service. She's a goddamn legend." Hawk's grip tightened on the phone. "Explain." "Captain Sarah Mitchell, U.S. Army Special Operations Combat Medic. 4 deployments, Iraq twice, Afghanistan twice. She was embedded with Special Forces units, Delta operators, the whole 9 yards. But here's where it gets interesting. October 2021, Kandahar Province. A joint Special Forces patrol got ambushed by Taliban fighters. 12 soldiers, 1 combat medic." Sarah, Hawk breathed. "The after-action reports are partially classified, but I called in a marker. What I can tell you is this. The patrol was supposed to be routine reconnaissance. Instead, they walked into a coordinated ambush. RPGs, small arms fire, the works. The team leader was killed in the first 30 seconds. Second in command took shrapnel to the leg, couldn't move. They were pinned down in a kill zone with nowhere to go." Hawk closed his eyes, imagining the scene. He'd been in similar situations. The chaos, the confusion, the terrible mathematics of combat where every second counted. "Sarah was the only medic," Smoke continued, his voice heavy. 6 soldiers were critically wounded, bleeding out. She had maybe 20 minutes before they'd be gone. Taliban fighters were closing in. She should have called for emergency evac and hoped for the best. But she didn't. Hell no. She grabbed the fallen team leader's rifle, laid down suppressive fire, then moved from soldier to soldier treating wounds under active engagement. When her medical supplies ran low, she improvised. Tore up her own uniform for bandages. Used duct tape to seal a sucking chest wound. Performed a field amputation with a combat knife to save a soldier's life when his arm was nearly severed and he was bleeding out. Hawk felt something cold settle in his stomach. That kind of field medicine under fire, that was beyond training. That was pure will. "The firefight lasted 11 hours, Smoke said quietly. 11 hours she held that position. She was hit twice by shrapnel, once in the shoulder, once in the thigh. Kept fighting, kept treating wounds. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found her still standing, weapon in one hand, medical bag in the other, 6 soldiers alive around her." "And the other 6? Smoke's pause said everything. "KIA, she tried, Hawk. God knows she tried, but even she couldn't save everyone." The silence stretched between them. "They gave her the Silver Star," Smoke finally continued. "One of only a handful of female soldiers to earn it in Afghanistan. Purple Heart for her wounds. The whole package. The Army wanted to make her a recruiting poster, parade her around, use her story. She refused everything. Finished her recovery, put in her papers, and disappeared into civilian medicine." "She's been hiding," Hawk said slowly, understanding dawning. "Running, more like. PTSD, survivor's guilt, take your pick. She saved 6 lives but lost 6 others. That kind of thing breaks people, especially combat medics. They take every death personally." Hawk thought about the haunted look in Sarah's eyes, the way she deflected praise, how she'd said the Army gave her nightmares and 6 dead faces. "There's more," Smoke added. "One of the soldiers she saved, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, He's now a full colonel at the Pentagon. I called him. He said, and I quote, "Captain Mitchell is the reason I'm alive to tuck my kids in at night. She's the bravest soldier I've ever served with." He started crying on the phone. Hawk. A full bird colonel. That's the kind of impact she had. Hawk stared at the ceiling, processing everything. The woman the doctors here dismissed as a delicate nurse from a civilian hospital had earned one of the nation's highest military honors. She'd killed enemy combatants, performed life-saving surgery under fire, and held a position against overwhelming odds. And she was letting Dr. Brennan treat her like she was incompetent. "Why isn't this common knowledge?" Hawk asked. "Why don't the doctors here know?" "Because she doesn't want them to know. When she took this job, she applied as Sarah Mitchell, civilian nurse. No mention of military service, no reference to her awards. She deliberately kept it quiet. My guess, she's trying to escape that part of her life, start over, be anonymous." "Well, anonymous just ended," Hawk said, his voice hardening with determination. "These doctors need to know who she is." Hawk, if she wanted people to know, she'd have told them. Maybe respect her privacy. Respect her privacy while they mock her, while they treat her like she's incompetent. Hawk's anger was rising now, burning through the medication fog. "She saved my life, Smoke. She's saving lives every day in this hospital, and they're treating her like garbage because she doesn't have MD after her name. So what are you going to do?" Hawk was quiet for a moment, his mind working through possibilities. Then a smile crossed his face, the kind of smile his SEAL teammates knew meant someone was about to have a very bad day. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who Captain Sarah Mitchell is," he said quietly, "whether she likes it or not. She's going to be pissed at you. Probably, but she'll get over it. Besides, what's she going to do? I'm a wounded warrior. She's a combat medic. Her whole purpose is keeping people like me alive." Smoke laughed. "You're playing a dangerous game, brother." "Wouldn't be the first time." Hawk paused. "Send me everything you've got. Photos, citations, after-action reports, anything you can access. I need ammunition." "You got it." And Hawk, "Yeah. That woman saved 6 lives under impossible conditions. She's earned her peace, whatever form that takes." "I know," Hawk said softly, "but she's also earned her respect, and I'm going to make sure she gets it." The night shift at Walter Reed had a particular quality, quieter than day, but somehow more intense. The shadows seemed deeper, the sounds more pronounced. For soldiers battling invisible wounds, nighttime was when the demons came out to play. Sarah was finishing her medication rounds on the ICU floor when she heard it, a sound that made her blood run cold. Not a scream exactly, but a guttural roar of pure terror mixed with rage. The kind of sound that came from somewhere primal, somewhere broken. Room 412. Private First Class Danny Ortega, 21 years old, paralyzed from the waist down after an IED strike in Syria 6 weeks ago. Physical wounds healing, psychological wounds still bleeding. Sarah dropped her medication cart and ran. She burst through the door to find chaos. Private Ortega was upright in his bed, his upper body strength keeping him elevated despite his useless legs. His eyes were wild, unfocused, not seeing Walter Reed's clean white walls but seeing something else. Somewhere else. His hand gripped a scalpel he'd somehow grabbed from the nearby medical tray, the blade catching the fluorescent light. "They're coming through the walls," he screamed, voice raw with terror. "Can't you see them? They're everywhere." 2 nurses backed toward the door, hands raised. A resident stood frozen, his face pale with fear. The night shift supervisor had her hand on the emergency call button. "Don't call security yet," Sarah said quietly, her voice cutting through the panic. "Are you insane?" the supervisor hissed. "He's got a weapon." "He's got a flashback," Sarah corrected, stepping slowly into the room. "He's not here, he's back in Syria reliving the attack." She kept her voice low, non-threatening. "Everyone else back up slowly. Don't make sudden movements. Don't shout. You'll only reinforce the hallucination." Mitchell, you can't, the resident started. I said back up, Sarah repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. They retreated to the hallway, though the supervisor kept her finger hovering over the panic button. Through the doorway, they could see Sarah approaching Private Ortega with impossibly calm steps. Down the hall, the commotion had drawn attention. Dr. Brennan appeared, still in his street clothes. He'd been working late in his office. Dr. Phillips was right behind him, along with several other staff members. "What the hell is going on?" Brennan demanded. "PTSD episode," the supervisor explained tersely. "Patient has a weapon. Mitchell went in alone." "She what?" Brennan pushed forward, but the resident grabbed his arm. "Sir, she said not to make sudden movements or loud noises. She's trying to de-escalate." Inside the room, Sarah had moved to within 10 feet of Ortega, close enough to talk, far enough to react if needed. His eyes darted around wildly, the scalpel shaking in his trembling hand. "Private Ortega," Sarah said softly. "My name is Captain Mitchell. I need you to listen to my voice." "Captain?" Ortega's eyes flickered toward her, recognition fighting through the nightmare. "Captain, they're in the walls. We have to get out." "I know what you're seeing," Sarah said, her voice steady and calm. "I know because I've seen it too, the shadows that move wrong, the walls that feel like they're closing in, the absolute certainty that the danger is real." Ortega blinked, confusion cutting through his terror for just a moment. You've seen it." "Kandahar Province, October 2021, Sarah said, taking one careful step closer. "I was trapped in a compound under enemy fire for 11 hours, soldiers dying around me, no way out, every shadow was a threat, every sound was incoming fire. I thought I was going to die there." The other medical staff watched in stunned silence. Dr. Brennan's mouth hung open slightly. "But you didn't die," Ortega whispered, his grip on the scalpel loosening fractionally. "No, I didn't, and neither did you, Danny. You're at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. It's 2:30 hours on Saturday morning. The war is over for you. You're home. You're safe." "I don't feel safe," Ortega said, and suddenly he was crying, tears streaming down his face. "I don't feel anything below my waist. I can't walk. I can't run. If they come again, I can't." "You don't need to run," Sarah said, taking another step closer. She slowly rolled up her sleeve, revealing the shrapnel scars on her forearm. "See these fragmentation wounds? I got them while I was treating wounded soldiers. I was so scared, Danny, terrified, but I kept working because that's what we do. We survive, we adapt, we overcome." She took another step. Now she was within arm's reach. "I still wake up at 300 hours in a cold sweat," Sarah continued, her voice thick with emotion. "I still see their faces, the ones I couldn't save. I still hear the sounds, the explosions, the screaming, the radio chatter calling for help that came too late. Some nights I'm back there, completely back there, and it's terrifying." "How do you make it stop?" Ortega's voice broke completely. "You don't make it stop," Sarah said honestly. "You learn to live with it, you find purpose. You find reasons to keep going. You accept that you're different now and that's okay. Different doesn't mean broken." She extended her hand slowly, palm up, non-threatening. "Give me the scalpel, Danny, please. Let me help you." For a long moment, Ortega stared at her hand. The scalpel trembled in his grip. Around him, the hallucination was fading, the walls becoming solid again, the shadows retreating. He was seeing reality now, seeing Sarah, seeing the truth in her eyes, the shared pain, the understanding that only came from living through the same hell. The scalpel clattered onto the bedside table. Ortega collapsed forward, his upper body falling into Sarah's arms. She caught him, holding him as he sobbed, great, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep in his soul. All the pain, all the fear, all the rage and grief and survivor's guilt pouring out. "I can't feel my legs," he gasped between sobs. "They're gone. Everything I was is gone." "No," Sarah said firmly, her own tears flowing freely now. "Your legs are damaged. Your body is different, but you, the person you are, the soldier you were, the man you're becoming, that's still here. That's still fighting. And as long as you're fighting, you're winning." She held him as he cried, rocking him slightly like a mother comforting a child, murmuring words of reassurance and understanding. Around them, the medical equipment beeped steadily. The fluorescent lights hummed. Normal sounds, safe sounds. In the hallway, absolute silence reigned. Dr. Brennan stood frozen, his face ashen. He'd practiced medicine for 23 years, saved countless lives, performed hundreds of successful surgeries, but he'd never seen anything like what he'd just witnessed. This wasn't medical skill. This was something deeper, connection forged in shared trauma, understanding that came from walking through the same fire. Dr. Phillips wiped his eyes quickly, pretending he had something in them. The night supervisor slowly took her finger off the panic button, her hand shaking. "Did she just?" one nurse whispered. "Yeah," another replied quietly. "She did." 20 minutes later, Ortega was sedated and sleeping peacefully. Sarah had arranged for a psychiatric consult in the morning and made detailed notes about the episode. Her hands were steady again as she worked, her professional mask back in place. When she emerged from the room, the hallway was still crowded with staff. They parted silently as she walked through, their expressions ranging from awe to shock to something approaching reverence. Dr. Brennan stepped forward, blocking her path. "Nurse Mitchell, It's late, doctor," Sarah interrupted quietly. "I need to finish my rounds." "No," Brennan said firmly. "No, this can't wait." His voice was rough with emotion. "What you just did, where did you learn?" "Necessity, doctor. I learned by necessity." Sarah's eyes were red-rimmed but clear. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have patients who need care." She walked past him, shoulders squared, head high. But Brennan could see it. The slight tremor in her hands, the tightness around her eyes, the way she held herself together through sheer force of will. This woman was carrying wounds deeper than any he'd ever treated. And she was still showing up, still serving, still saving lives. He'd been so wrong about her, so catastrophically, shamefully wrong. Dr. Brennan returned to his office in a daze. He sat at his desk, staring at nothing, replaying the scene over and over in his mind. The calm authority in Sarah's voice, the genuine empathy in her words, the way she'd walked into danger without hesitation because someone needed help. That wasn't just nursing. That was heroism. His computer screen glowed in the darkness. Almost without conscious thought, his fingers moved across the keyboard, typing a name into the hospital's personnel database. Sarah Mitchell, employee records. The file was sparse. Basic nursing credentials, employment history showing 3 years at a civilian hospital, references, background check, nothing unusual. Nothing that explained what he'd just seen. Brennan sat back, troubled. Something didn't add up. The pieces didn't fit. That level of combat trauma knowledge, that tactical communication style, those scars on her arms. Down the hall in the ICU, Commander James Harrison had watched the entire episode through his partially open door. He'd heard every word, seen every moment. Now he picked up his phone and opened the file Smoke had sent him hours earlier. Photographs, citations, after-action reports, the complete story of Captain Sarah Mitchell, American hero. Tomorrow, he decided, tomorrow everyone would know the truth. It was time to stop letting her hide. The conference room on the 3rd floor of Walter Reed was rarely used this early in the morning. At 800 hours on Monday, it was packed. Dr. Brennan stood near the head of the table, confused and irritated. "I don't understand why I was summoned here. I have surgery scheduled in 40 minutes. Hospital administration requested your presence," the floor supervisor explained. Apparently, Commander Harrison made a formal request for this meeting, said it was urgent. "A patient requested a staff meeting," Dr. Phillips scoffed. "Since when do we take orders from?" The door opened and Commander James Harrison entered, moving slowly but determinedly. He wore his navy dress whites. Someone had brought them from his quarters. The uniform was crisp, the ribbons and medals gleaming on his chest. Two junior officers flanked him, providing support as he walked, but his bearing was unmistakably military. "Commander, you should be in bed," Dr. Brennan said, concern overriding his irritation. "Your injuries are healing fine, thanks to excellent care," Hawk interrupted. His voice was strong despite the obvious pain movement caused him. "I'll be brief, but what I have to say needs to be said, and it needs to be said to all of you." He positioned himself at the front of the room, gripping the table for support. Around him, the assembled staff, doctors, nurses, administrators, watched with growing curiosity. "For the past 2 weeks, I've been a patient in this facility," Hawk began. "I've received outstanding medical care. Your surgeons saved my life. Your nurses kept me alive, but I've also observed something deeply troubling." Dr. Brennan shifted uncomfortably. "I've watched talented medical professionals be dismissed, mocked, and undermined. I've heard doctors question the competence of someone who's proven herself over and over again. I've seen respect withheld from someone who's earned it 1,000 times over." "Commander, if this is about a personnel issue, there are proper channels," Brennan started. "I'm not finished, Doctor." Hawk's tone was sharp enough to cut steel. 3 days ago, I watched a nurse take command of a mass casualty situation and save 23 lives. She did what many of you couldn't or wouldn't do. She brought order to chaos. She made life-or-death decisions under pressure, and she did it while most of you stood frozen. Murmurs rippled through the room. 2 nights ago, I witnessed that same nurse talk down a soldier having a violent PTSD episode. She put herself in danger, walked into a room with an armed, hallucinating patient, because she knew she could help. And she did help. She saved that soldier's life as surely as if she'd restarted his heart. The door opened again. Sarah Mitchell entered, still in her scrubs from the night shift, her hair pulled back in its usual tight bun. She looked exhausted, confused about why she'd been summoned. Her eyes met Hawk's, and something passed between them. Understanding, resignation, perhaps a touch of betrayal. "Commander, what's going on?" she asked quietly. "Justice," Hawk replied simply. Then, despite the obvious pain it caused, despite the protests from his support officers, Commander James Harrison came to attention. The room went absolutely silent. His right hand rose in a crisp, perfect military salute, the kind rendered between warriors, the kind that carried weight and meaning beyond mere protocol. "Captain Sarah Mitchell," his voice rang out clear and strong. "Ma'am." Sarah's face drained of color. Her hand instinctively started to rise in return before she caught herself, her eyes wide with shock and something that looked like panic. "Commander, please," she whispered, "don't." "You've served in silence long enough, Captain," Hawk said, his hand still raised. "These people deserve to know who you are, what you've done, what you've sacrificed." He turned to address the room, though his salute never wavered. "The woman you've been calling Nurse Mitchell, the one you dismissed as delicate, the one you've mocked and undermined, is Captain Sarah Mitchell, United States Army, retired. She's a special operations combat medic with 4 combat deployments. She's been embedded with Delta Force, Army Rangers, and Special Forces units in the most dangerous regions of Iraq and Afghanistan." Dr. Brennan's mouth fell open. Dr. Phillips went pale. Hawk continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. On October 14, 2021, Captain Mitchell's patrol was ambushed in Kandahar province. 12 soldiers, 1 medic. The team leader was killed instantly. 6 soldiers were critically wounded. They were pinned down in a kill zone with no cover and no reinforcements for 11 hours. He paused, letting that sink in. 11 hours under fire. It was incomprehensible to most of the people in that room. Captain Mitchell grabbed a rifle and returned fire while simultaneously treating catastrophic injuries. She used her own uniform for bandages. She performed a field amputation with a combat knife to save a soldier's life. She was hit twice by shrapnel, once in the shoulder, once in the thigh, and continued fighting, continued treating, continued refusing to give up. Sarah's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Her hands trembled at her sides. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found her still standing, still armed, still protecting the 6 soldiers she'd kept alive against impossible odds. Hawk's voice grew thick with emotion. 6 soldiers went home to their families because this woman refused to accept that death was inevitable. 6 fathers, brothers, sons, alive because of her courage. The room was utterly silent except for the quiet sound of someone crying. Hawk couldn't tell who. The United States Army awarded Captain Mitchell the Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. She received the Purple Heart for wounds received in combat. She earned a combat medical badge with distinction. She is, by any measure, an American hero. Dr. Brennan had tears streaming down his face, his expression twisted with shame and remorse. And yet, Hawk's voice hardened, she's been treated like an incompetent, mocked, dismissed, told she's too delicate for military medicine. He turned his gaze to Dr. Brennan. By people who wouldn't last 30 seconds in the situation she survived for 11 hours. The rebuke landed like a physical blow. "Commander, please lower your arm," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "You're going to reopen your wounds." "After you return the salute, Captain," Hawk replied firmly. "Military courtesy, you earned this." For a long moment, Sarah stood frozen. Then slowly her spine straightened. Her shoulders went back. The exhausted nurse vanished, replaced by the soldier she'd tried so hard to leave behind. Her hand rose in a perfect salute, precise, respectful, carrying the weight of years of service and sacrifice. "At ease, Commander," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "And thank you, but you really need to sit down before you pass out." Hawk finally lowered his arm and allowed the officers to ease him into a chair. But his eyes never left Sarah's face. One by one, the medical staff stood. Not in salute, most of them weren't military, but in respect. A gesture of acknowledgement for someone they'd grotesquely misjudged. Dr. Brennan approached Sarah, his face haggard. "Captain Mitchell, His voice failed. He tried again. "I owe you an apology that I can never adequately express. I was arrogant, dismissive, and blind. You deserved respect from the moment you walked through these doors, and instead I gave you contempt. I'm deeply ashamed." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said quietly, "I didn't come here for recognition, Doctor. I came to serve, the same as I always have." "But you deserve recognition," Dr. Phillips said, stepping forward, his own face red with shame. "We treated you horribly. I treated you horribly. And you just took it, kept doing your job, kept saving lives. Even ours in a way when you showed us how it's really done." Sarah shook her head. "I don't need medals or acknowledgement. I need you to treat the soldiers in this hospital with the respect and understanding they deserve. They're not just injuries to fix. They're warriors carrying wounds you can't see on an X-ray. They need doctors who understand that, who care about that." "Then teach us," Dr. Brennan said urgently. "Please, help us be better. Let us learn from you." For the first time since entering the room, Sarah's expression softened slightly. "That I can do." Hawk watched the exchange with satisfaction despite the pain throbbing through his chest. Mission accomplished. Sarah's secret was out. Her heroism recognized. Her respect earned, no reclaimed. She caught his eye and mouthed silently, "We're going to talk about this." Hawk smiled slightly and mouthed back, "Worth it." The meeting dispersed slowly, staff members approaching Sarah one by one to apologize, to thank her, to express their newfound respect. She handled each interaction with grace, though Hawk could see the exhaustion in her eyes, Not physical fatigue, but emotional weariness. She'd hidden for so long, and now there was nowhere left to hide. As the last person filed out, Sarah collapsed into a chair beside Hawk. For a long moment they sat in silence. "I didn't want this," she finally said. "I know. I came here to escape it, to be anonymous, to just serve quietly." "I know that too." Hawk turned to face her. "But they needed to know, Sarah. You were being treated like garbage by people who should have been grateful just to work alongside you. That's not right. That's not justice." Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then very softly she said, "6 soldiers lived. 6 soldiers died. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who couldn't save them all." "You're someone who saved everyone you possibly could," Hawk corrected gently. "That's the definition of a hero, Captain, whether you accept it or not." 6 weeks after the conference room revelation, Walter Reed National Military Medical Center felt different. Not in any dramatic, obvious way. The walls were still the same institutional white, the floors still gleamed under fluorescent lights, the monitors still beeped their steady rhythms. But something fundamental had shifted in the culture, in the air itself. It started small. Dr. Brennan requested a private meeting with Sarah 3 days after the salute incident. He appeared at her station during a quiet afternoon shift, his usual commanding presence replaced by something humbler. "Captain Mitchell, Sarah, if I may, I'd like to formally request your expertise," he said, the words clearly difficult for him. "I want to develop new protocols for treating combat-related PTSD in our surgical patients. I've realized that we've been treating bodies while ignoring minds. I need someone who understands both." Sarah studied him for a long moment, seeing genuine contrition in his eyes. "That would require significant changes to your approach, doctor. It means listening to patients differently, seeing symptoms you've been trained to ignore." "I know," Brennan replied, "and I'm ready to learn if you're willing to teach." She extended her hand. "Then let's get started." Within 2 weeks, Sarah was leading training seminars twice weekly. Doctors, nurses, residents, even seasoned staff with decades of experience crowded into the conference room to learn from her. She taught them to recognize the signs of invisible wounds, how patients' sudden aggression might be a flashback, not defiance, how nighttime restlessness could indicate hypervigilance, not pain, how to talk to warriors without patronizing them, how to honor their service while treating their injuries. Dr. Phillips attended every session, taking meticulous notes. During one seminar, he raised his hand hesitantly. "Captain Mitchell, I wanted to say something publicly. I made inappropriate comments when you first arrived. I judged you based on gender and appearance rather than competence. I'm sorry, truly sorry." Sarah nodded, acknowledging his apology. "We all have biases, doctor. The question is whether we're willing to confront them and grow. You're here. That's what matters." The protocols Sarah developed became hospital standard within a month. A specialized PTSD response team was formed, trained in de-escalation techniques drawn from her combat experience. The psychiatric department expanded its reach, integrating mental health screening into routine surgical follow-ups. Soldiers began receiving holistic care, treatment for bodies and souls together. Private Danny Ortega, the young man who'd had the violent episode, became one of Sarah's strongest advocates. After intensive therapy and physical rehabilitation, he regained some mobility and started volunteering in the hospital's peer support program. "Captain Mitchell saved my life twice," he told new patients. "Once when she talked me down, and again when she showed me that being different doesn't mean being broken." Commander Hawk Harrison recovered steadily under Sarah's continued care. Their relationship evolved from patient-nurse to something resembling friendship, built on mutual respect and shared understanding. During his final week at Walter Reed, he convinced Sarah to join him for coffee in the hospital courtyard. "You're shipping out soon," Sarah observed, sipping her terrible cafeteria coffee. "Day after tomorrow, back to Coronado for final medical clearance, then back to my team." Hawk studied her over his cup. You still angry about the salute incident? Sarah smiled slightly. I was never really angry, more frustrated. I'd worked hard to leave Captain Mitchell behind. You brought her back. Maybe you needed her back, Hawk suggested gently. Maybe these soldiers need her. Maybe you need to stop running from who you are. I'm not running anymore, Sarah said quietly. I'm just integrating, learning that I can be both, the soldier and the nurse, the warrior and the healer. That's all any of us can do, Hawk replied. None of us leave the battlefield unchanged. We just choose what we do with those changes. On his final day, Hawk was cleared for discharge. Staff gathered informally to see him off, doctors who'd treated his wounds, nurses who'd monitored his recovery, therapists who'd helped him regain mobility. Sarah stood slightly apart from the group, professional as always. Hawk approached her last, moving without assistance now, though his gait still carried a slight hitch from his injuries. Captain, he said formally. Commander, she replied with equal formality. Then they both smiled, and the formality dissolved. Hawk pulled an envelope from his pocket and pressed it into her hand. Don't read it until I'm gone, he instructed. I'm terrible with goodbyes. Take care of yourself, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. And thank you for everything. Thank you for keeping me alive long enough to be a pain in your ass, Hawk replied with a grin. Then more seriously, you're exactly where you're supposed to be, Sarah. Doing exactly what you're meant to do. Don't ever doubt that. He walked away before she could respond, his dress uniform crisp, his bearing proud despite lingering injuries. A warrior returning to his tribe, healed by someone who understood what healing truly meant. Sarah waited until her shift ended before opening the envelope. Inside, on official Navy letterhead, was a handwritten note. Captain Mitchell. There's a saying in the teams, the only easy day was yesterday. I used to think it meant that life keeps getting harder. Now I understand it means something different, that we carry our hardest days with us, but we keep moving forward anyway. You carry Kandahar with you. 6 faces, 6 names, 6 lives you couldn't save. But you also carry 6 other lives, the ones you did save. And now, hundreds more. Every soldier who passes through Walter Reed benefits from your experience, your compassion, your refusal to give up. You once told me you weren't a hero. You're wrong. A hero isn't someone who never fails. A hero is someone who fails, grieves, carries the weight of that failure, and still shows up the next day to try again. You show up every single day. You save lives on battlefields and in hospital wards. You teach others to see wounds they've been trained to ignore. You honor fallen warriors by refusing to let their living brothers and sisters suffer in silence. If that's not heroism, I don't know what is. Stay strong, stay stubborn, keep saving lives. Semper Fidelis. Commander James Hawk Harrison. P.S. The soldier whose life you saved with that field amputation in Kandahar. His name was Corporal David Martinez. He's now a Paralympic athlete. He runs marathons on prosthetic legs. He sent his kids photos when he heard you were treating me. They're beautiful. He said to tell you that every day with them is a day you gave him. You gave him everything. Sarah read the letter 3 times, tears flowing freely by the end. She'd never known what happened to the soldiers she'd saved. They'd been evacuated while she was still being treated for her own wounds. She'd carried 6 dead faces. She'd never let herself see the 6 living ones. David Martinez, alive, thriving, father, athlete, living the life she'd fought to preserve. Maybe one life wasn't enough to balance 6 deaths, but it was one life that wouldn't have existed without her. One family intact, one father present, one story with a different ending because she'd refused to quit. Maybe that did matter. Maybe Hawk was right. Sarah carefully folded the letter and placed it in her locker, next to her old dog tags and the silver star she'd never displayed. 3 pieces of her past, acknowledged but not defined by them. She had rounds to finish, soldiers to care for, lives to protect. The ghosts would always be there. Kandahar would always be part of her, but so would Walter Reed. So would every soldier she helped heal, every life she touched, every moment she chose to serve rather than surrender to grief. As she walked back through the hospital corridors, nurses nodded respectfully. Doctors consulted her on difficult cases. A young soldier recovering from leg surgery caught her eye and smiled. She talked him through a panic attack 2 days ago, sharing her own struggles to let him know he wasn't alone. "Good evening, Captain," Dr. Brennan called out, genuine warmth in his voice. "Good evening, Doctor," Sarah replied. "Captain, not nurse, not Mitchell, Captain." She'd spent 3 years trying to leave that rank behind, to be anonymous, to hide from the woman she'd been in combat. But Hawk had forced her to confront a truth she'd been avoiding. Captain Mitchell and Nurse Mitchell weren't separate people. They were the same woman, shaped by fire, carrying wounds, but still fighting, still serving, still saving lives. And for the first time since Kandahar, Sarah Mitchell felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Peace. Not the absence of pain, she'd never have that, but the acceptance that pain had purpose, that her scars meant something, that the 6 faces she carried weren't failures but reminders of why her work mattered, why she kept showing up, why she'd never stop fighting for the living. She had work to do, soldiers to save, lives to honor,